Everything that happens in the company happens on a tool somewhere. So if you truly want to have a model that is trusted by not just finance, but the rest of the company, you have to be able to connect to all different sources of data in your company.
Welcome back to CFO Weekly, where we're talking with financial leaders about how to build efficiency in their teams, create time for strategy, and ultimately get results. This podcast is brought to you by Personiv, the trusted leader in finance and accounting outsourcing for over 30 years. See how Personiv's customized solutions can help you streamline your operations with teams that start as small as one. Visit the website at personiv.com to learn more. I'm your host, Megan Weis. Let's jump right in. Siqi is Chief Financial Officer at Runway, where he also holds the position of CEO. Runway helps finance teams become 10 times more efficient by delivering accurate, real-time forecasts with zero manual work. Connecting with tools like QuickBooks, NetSuite, Snowflake, and more, Runway empowers you to create plans that truly reflect how your business operates. The result? Finance made understandable and accessible for every stakeholder. Runway is trusted by teams at Superhuman, AngelList, RevenueCat, MyFitnessPal, 818 Tequila, Kit, 12 Labs, Lambda, and many others. Siqi is also a member of the board of directors at Sandbox VR, where he previously held the position of CEO and President and Chief Product Officer. Siqi, thank you very much for being with us here today.
Megan, thanks for having me. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back. So your career has spanned nearly every angle of company building, from founder to CEO to product leader and now CFO at Runway. And that gives you unusually deep perspective on how finance, product, and strategy intersect. Before we dive into the mechanics of automation, real-time forecasting, and the future of connected systems, I'd love to start with the personal. Was there a defining moment in your journey when you realized the finance function, as most companies know it, needed to be rebuilt from the ground up? And what did that moment reveal to you?
You know, it was really a culmination of a lot of experiences, but the one moment would be when COVID just hit and I was just appointed CEO of a company called Sandbox VR 5 years ago. We had about 400 or so employees. We're entirely retail business. And so when COVID hit, the world shut down, we immediately had to change our plans. And just the process of creating these scenarios for how long COVID might last, what are the different actions we took, made me realize that, oh my God, there's got to be a better way. We have great products like Notion and Figma today. What's the equivalent for finance? Why is it so underserved? That's probably the single moment that started Runway for me.
And building on that moment of realization, let's talk about how you navigate your dual role as both CEO and CFO of Runway. How do you balance long-term strategic vision with the discipline and operational rigor expected from a finance leader?
In my role as CEO and founder, the thing I think about is if you want to do something large, you must start with a very large vision. But I think where most people get it wrong is they go straight for that vision. But the thing is, if you are not infinitely flexible on the path you take there, then you're not going to make it, right? The mental model I have is that on the way between where you are today and where you want to be, which is really, really far, really, really ambitious, there's like these sort of invisible walls before you. If you're not willing to go feel them out and go around them, then you're going to be just walking into them all the time. And a lot of times the walls don't move. So the flexibility of the short term and the ambition of the long term and having them in balance is how I think about operating as a CEO. As a CFO, you take a pretty similar tack, and you want to have a very ambitious goals over the long run financially for both the efficiency, the growth rate, the scale of your company. And I think the way you get there is you have to measure things very closely on a lower granularity than a quarter or a year. So we do weekly business reviews at Runway, and we've broken down the business into component metrics that add up to the metrics we care about, which is ultimately growth and margin and scale. And every week, every owner of a metric reports on a metric. We talk about what's changed, what are the exceptions, and then we go through a roadmap for all the different metric owners on what was done, where we are today, and where we want to be. what we're going to do to change them in 3 months. And so that kind of rigor combined with the understanding that everything important in business can be measured and the balancing of the art and the science of business is ultimately how we balance the two.
And before we dive in any deeper, let's just take a minute and talk about Runway. Like you mentioned the moment of clarity when you realized that something needed to change. Talk about the journey you've been on to build the product and now where you are today.
It's been a fairly long journey. So when we first started Runway, it was 2020. And first product we built is a very good reporting product. It went into your QuickBooks and that's pretty much it. And it gave you a very good insight into where your money went. And it was a very flexible reporting tool. So you could see things by department and then drill in to different pivots for each department. So you could view your engineering costs by vendor, but you could view your operational costs by account instead. And it was a fairly useful tool for small businesses. But what we quickly realized is that the companies for which this problem of finance is most acute, most valuable, most painful tend to be the higher growing ones, the larger ones. And the problems that they encounter are very different from that of a small business. The problems that they encounter are how do we trade off strategic decisions involving tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of CapEx and OpEx, and what decisions should they make around hiring and strategy? And this is a very valuable and painful problem for a couple of reasons. The problems of this type is not just limited to finance, right? It's about thinking. It's about having a clear understanding of what are the drivers and levers of the business and being able to form an intuition around them. So it's not just about getting the numbers right. It's about having correct simulation in the business, making that simulation legible, and then ultimately exposing the right controls, like a video game, to the rest of the company that aren't in finance as well, so that you as a leader in the company have one single source of truth, one aligned view of how the business works. And that is a very difficult design and engineering problem that took a lot of time for us to get right. It involved just iterating, testing with customers, first principles on what is experience that makes running a company actually understandable to people in the company. And so it's just been a very long journey of experimentation, along with just having wide surface area of what you have to build to get yourself off the ground. So you can imagine just to get yourself off the ground, we had to build a combination of Excel plus Notion plus Workato just to bring all your data in. And that's just to get your foot in the door. So there's a tremendous amount of time that it took to build and a tremendous amount of care that required to get it off the ground.
And you've positioned the Runway platform as a 10 times efficiency tool for finance teams. So from your vantage point as a CFO, what inefficiencies existed in traditional FP&A that you think most urgently needed reinvention?
So there's obvious ones that is going to be like the most immediate pains that every finance person has. And by and large, these pains are addressed by most platforms. And then there's the less obvious ones, which is where we spend an inordinate amount of time getting it right. So the obvious pains that come to every finance person, especially in FP&A, I think there's three categories. And pains are somewhat emotional. And so I'll talk about the emotions too. So the first kind of pain is you just have so much data across more and more data sources in your organization. So you start with a general ledger, and then you add an HRS system, and then you have a data warehouse, maybe a marketing platform, or maybe analytics platform, project management software. And ultimately, all of this will feed into your model because your model has to have the correct understanding of the current state of your company in order to correctly forecast. So an enormous amount of time is spent just actualizing your model. So the amount of time I've seen finance people do ETL workflows, extract, transform, and load from different data sources, exporting from NetSuite, pasting in all the transactions for a given month into a different spreadsheet that will transform it and group it and aggregate it into a form that they can actually forecast from in their model. And they do it for every single data source they have. It's just an enormous time sink, and it's probably one of the more painful experiences. And so the experience that you're feeling is frustration. You're spending so much of your time on low leverage work, and you're looking for something that can automate that. So that's the first kind of pain. The second kind of pain happens when you have more people in your company. You have more departments, more people to get information from, more people to align your plans to. And it's like herding cats. And the way most finance leaders do this today is we're all familiar, if you run any department, with that budget spreadsheet that you get about once a quarter from the finance department. So you create this budget template in Google Sheets or something like that. And you have a skeleton template, you email it to the different department leaders, and you're paying them on Slack to please fill it out, before X deadline. So you know how much they're going to spend and maybe some idea of like what their plans are. And for department leaders, it's probably the last thing on their to-do list. It's just paperwork that they didn't sign up to do. So you're just constantly paying them. And the feeling that you're starting to feel is resentment, this feeling of you are a finance leader and you are responsible, accountable for the financial health of the business. And it seems like you're the only person who cares and the rest of the people just don't. And that's pretty painful. And the third kind of pain is you just have more complexity in your business. So Sheets has a 10 million cell limit. We all know if you have a very complex Excel model, the performance tends to grind down. And when you have that many cells, that many formulas, you get this lingering doubt in the back of your mind, right? Like if there's a error in one of the cells in 10 million cells, if you accidentally fat fingered a cell, then your entire model is now not reliable. So you get this increasing feeling of anxiousness, anxiety, of like, oh my God, I don't know if I can trust the integrity of my model moving forward. And so at some point, all these pains converge and you're looking for something to solve it. And so you buy sort of a regular known FP&A platform. But then what happens on the other end is you have a brand new kind of pain, is that you spend all this time implementing one of these platforms. And then what happens 6 months later is you realize, oh my God, I need to change something. I need to plan for a new business unit, plan for a new go-to-market motion. Maybe your business model has changed and you have a brand new entity. And now, instead of having it be relatively flexible and easy to change on your spreadsheet, because for all of its faults of a spreadsheet is really good at that. It's really good at helping you be flexible and changing it really rapidly. Now you're on this platform and you have to hire a consultant for $100 an hour just to make the simplest change. It would take you like a couple of minutes on a spreadsheet. So now you feel an entirely different kind of pain. So these are most of the pains that we see finance people experience today.
And that naturally leads to Runway's signature promise, which is real-time forecasting with zero manual work. So what were the biggest technical and organizational hurdles that you had to overcome to build a forecasting engine that accomplishes these goals and that finance leaders can truly trust?
We spend a lot of time thinking from first principles about it, just to get a modeling. So, I mean, from a naive perspective, if you were to build a product in the space, what would you build? You have to build a modeling engine, right? So you have to build the right formulas. You have to build a way to bring all the sources of data that you use to feed your model into your platform. And by and large, everyone does this. We do this too. But what distinguishes Runway and what makes a truly real-time forecast that you can trust, that a company can also understand and is useful to company, is around bringing in the operational intent into the model for the first time. So what I mean by that is when you think about the utility of a model, it's not just about understanding where you're going to go and having an accurate forecast. That is a highly useful thing. But one of the truisms about planning is that the value of a plan is not necessarily the plan itself, but it's the process of planning. And so another important critical value of having a model is developing intuition and understanding of how to operate, of what are the decisions that you're going to make that's going to increase scale and growth and margin a year, 2 years down the line. And when you think about that, when you think about how a finance leader, a business leader, a sales leader, a founder, CEO thinks about their business, it's unlikely that what's in your head, the construct that's in your head when you think about these problems, feel like or look like a wall of numbers. What it far more likely looks like is I have some kind of project plan, a strategic roadmap of some kind. And usually that's documented in the form of a document, right? So that lives in Notion or Google Docs or a project management system, and is often completely disconnected with the numbers. And so what is really required is to figure out a way to connect the levers in the form of these plans, these projects, these decisions that you might make, the way you think about taking action in your business with business outcomes and numbers for the first time. And that required a tops down and a bottoms up rethinking of the mechanics of a model and even a spreadsheet. So one specific example, right? So let's say you have a spreadsheet and you have a time series row, right? Maybe the row is like conversion rate, or the row is average contract value. And when you're forecasting and making these changes, you need to understand and offload into this model some changes to this, right? Maybe you're going to assume that your conversion rate is going to go up by 10% 6 months from now. Or maybe you assume that your churn is going to go down by 20% 2 months from now. The way you do that in your spreadsheet is you just change the number in the future. And that works in Runway, but we thought, okay, when a number changes in the future and you intentionally explicitly make this change, there's more than just a number changing. It changed for a reason. You have to do something to change it, or maybe something in the world changed it. Maybe you improve the product. You have a new product release. Maybe you hired a growth team. Maybe you change your pricing and packaging so your ACVs are going to go up. Something happened that made this number change. And when something happens, someone has to make it happen. So we thought, well, if we can make this idea of a change a real object, it's an event, it's a plan, and then we can pose them in projects. Now we can build something really, really useful that can connect the strategic plans and roadmaps to the operational outcomes at the same time. That's why when you have plans in Runway, you can just drag them left and right on the timeline. You can just see the time meter changes in real time, right? You can just change the value of your plans. Plans have names. So when you look at your plans, you can see what they add up to, how to flex your KPIs. So all of these decisions come out of really thinking deeply about how do we make this model as understandable and as close to what's in your head when you think about your business as possible.
And I'm just curious, is it like, if I just bought the product off the shelf, would it be useful? Or is there like months-long implementation that goes into running this tool? And does it sit on an ERP, or how does it work?
So we integrate with just under 800 different sources of data. So to start, it's really, really fast to bring your data into Runway. So if you just want to have your reporting and have your HR systems talk to your analytics systems and talk to your GL, your general ledger, and have it all in the same place, that's really, really, really fast. And as part of using Runway, you build your model in Runway the same way you build it in Excel. And the reason why it is much faster to onboard to Runway than any other platform is because we made it really flexible. We wanted to make it as fast, if not faster, to build a model in Runway than to use a spreadsheet, because we have constructs like dimensions and drivers and plans, and all of these things ultimately accelerate the time to onboarding. So there is implementation time, just like any other finance platform, but it should be on the order of building a model in Excel or less. So that's how we think about it. And this is, you can go on G2 and look at the average implementation times for a product like this. Famously, I think Stripe took 2 years to implement Anaplan. And I think it averaged about 6 months, and we're averaging about 6 weeks or less. And you can get up and running with basic reporting in far less time than that.
Wow. So you've emphasized creating clarity as a core value at Runway. How does that principle influence the way that you design financial models, dashboards, and planning workflows for your customers?
We talked a lot about the right primitives, the right constructs, having these plans, dimensions, drivers, departments, these things that flexibly map to how people think about their business. And so flexibility is one way of us doing that, right? So a lot of systems that you might be familiar with hard code how your company works, what ARR is, how you pay your sales team. And every company is subtly different. This is why Excel is so powerful. It lets you model anything. And so we do that too. We have the flexibility of something like Excel, but also the structure that makes it easy for you to create models and plans that make sense to you. So that's one way we do it. The other way we do it is just through design. And design is not how things look, as Steve Jobs famously said. It's how things work. The fundamental primitives of the user experience, the speed by which you can manipulate your scenarios and your model, those are the things that create clarity. One of the most frequent adjectives we hear from finance people about their experience using Runway, and this is our goal, but I'm still surprised sometimes to hear it, that this is literally the most frequent thing people say, that it feels fun. And fun in most products feels like a luxury. It feels frivolous as an adjective. But I think it's actually underrated importance in the context of clarity. Because if you think about what is required for you to have a fun experience, things have to be simple and understandable. If you're confused, you're not having fun. Things have to be fast. You have to be in flow. If things are slow or if you're blocked, you're not having fun. If you are in flow and if things are clear, not only are you having fun, but what those qualities enable is a sense of clarity, a sense of understanding, a sense of creativity. And all of those concepts, all of those qualities are really important when you're making important strategic decisions. We have all of these little mantras in Runway. One of them is finance is not about finance at all. Finance is everything that happens in a company, because everything that happens in a company falls to the bottom line somewhere. And another one is planning and finance is not just a rote act. It's a creative act. Business is a creative act. Being able to find opportunities is a creative act. And we are at our most creative. We're in flow. We're having a good time. Things are fast. Things don't feel confusing. And we've engineered Runway explicitly for that purpose by having a good user experience that's fast and intuitive and flexible.
I love the word fun. I think that must be an amazing compliment. To me, fun is the opposite of frustrating.
It's the opposite of frustrating. I like that.
And continuing on the theme of clarity, many financial tools focus exclusively on financial analysts or accountants. So how do you ensure that Runway is accessible and valuable for even non-finance stakeholders?
The way we think about it is we're designing this for human beings. And finance people are people too. So are salespeople. So are product people. And so the principles that we think about how we design this experience at this Runway is not specific to finance, right? This is why our mantra is finance is not about finance at all. It's about everything that happens in the company. And so we just think about it from a human standpoint. How does a human go about operating in a business? And that is the difference between a human and a pre-AI computer. Why are spreadsheets so valuable? Spreadsheets are a tool for thinking, and they help augment human thought in ways that our organic, squishy brains aren't as good at, so that we can offload that bandwidth, that processing bandwidth on more important things, things that our squishy human brains are good at. These are things like creativity, thinking about what the strategy should be, having fun, discovering new insights. And what we're not good at is instantly calculating the relationships of 10 million formulas. We're very bad at that, in fact. In fact, if you're good at it at some level, you're tending to be brain damaged in some other way. And what computers are very good at is exactly that. So spreadsheets before computers were literally printed out on a table, and you would have, when you change a number, you have an army of people literally recalculating all of the cells by hand. And spreadsheets and computers made that a lot faster. And so that is a tool for thinking. And I think about Runway very much as a tool for thinking. Tools for thought, like spreadsheets, they augment your brain. They offload these things that are hard to do in your brain into something that, so that your brain can do the more easy things. And when you think about the history of information technology, right, spreadsheets is an example of it, but so is a whiteboard. A whiteboard allows you to offload things that you can't just think through independently in your own head, that you can't hold all of it all at once. So you write it down on the whiteboard, and now it does two things. One is you can see and hold more context you might otherwise forget. But the other thing that a whiteboard does is that it allows other people to work with you. Now that someone else can see the context in your head and you can collaborate together. And so when we think about how we enable this for Runway, one, the idea of better primitives. And two, we have this very collaborative experience so that you can actually work with other people who also understand your intent, also understand how the model works. And that clarity that Runway offers is very, very different than an experience of working with a spreadsheet with 10 million cells and no one can really understand how all the formulas work, right? If you have an index match formula, you have to, and with a bunch of naming ranges, it's darn near impossible to trace. So you have to do a lot of manual processing that your brain really wasn't designed to do, to really understand it and work with other teammates. But with Runway, you just have different constructs. It's not just a wall of numbers. You can see plans, you can see projects, you can see how it impacts the KPIs that you care about. And it's really easy to trace through and understand how things are calculated. Instead of going to different sheets, you can just drill in. And so we have all of these design decisions that were completely around how do we make this as understandable as possible to all humans, not just finance people.
And as you mentioned, Runway connects with tools like QuickBooks, NetSuite, Snowflake, and I think you said more than 800 others. So what does the future of connected financial systems look like to you? And how will automation reshape the CFO role along the way?
Going back to finance is about everything that happens in a company. Almost everything that happens in a company happens on a tool somewhere. So if you truly want to have a model that is trusted by not just finance, but the rest of the company, so you don't have to endlessly copy and paste outputs from different models into this main model, you have to be able to connect to all different sources of data in your company. And the reality is that every department not only has a different source of truth, it also has a different model. So what we've seen is that, the sales team has a CRM, but it doesn't have their own sales forecasting model that doesn't connect to your finance model. The product team has an analytics system like Amplitude or Data Warehouse. And they also have their growth model that completely doesn't talk to your finance model at all. So having a wide breadth integrations that aren't just the usual, you have your general ledger integration and maybe an HR's integration, but also the CRM, also your marketing data, your Snowflake data, your analytics data, even your project management data. Having such a wide breadth of integrations is critical if you truly want to have everyone plan and work and understand your business all in the same place. And so that's why we spend an enormous amount of time supporting so many integrations. And connected to that, it's not just integrations. It's also how do you have a sense of trust when you bring the other parts of the company in? How do you trust them to, one, not accidentally change something like one of the 10 million cells in your model that you don't know about later? How do you trust them to be able to see just the things that they're allowed to see, but not be able to see everyone's salaries? So it required building version control systems, right? So anyone can play with the model, but if you want to merge it back to the main model, you have to have the rights to do it. So you can, once they're admin, you can trust them that they're not going to randomly change something. And also, it requires very fine-grained permissions. So maybe you want to have people only see a small subset of your model, and you could do that. Or maybe you're a company that's fairly transparent and you want people to see everything except for salaries and equity data. And you can do that because you have role and column level permissions. So all of these subtle design details is ultimately what's required for a platform to be able to bring in the rest of the company.
And on the topic of connection, you've built an impressive community on Twitter that's helped drive early traction. So how has that direct line to customers influenced how you think about product prioritization and financial decision-making?
Twitter is the top of the funnel. And I tweet about a number of different things. I tweet about AI. For a time, I talked about crypto a little bit, but mostly I talk about the experience of running a company. And I think in this day and age, people buy from people. In a world where you're getting bombarded by AI-generated cold sales calls and cold sales emails, having a direct relationship with the people who are responsible and building their product, I think it's a really important way for me to understand where we need to go, and also for customers to develop a relationship with the company even before they're ready for a product like Runway. And in the middle of the funnel, we actually, when people onboard, we create a shared Slack channel with every single customer that we have. And I am in every single one of these Slack channels. And sometimes I'm answering support tickets, creating tickets from them. And our team sometimes will use AI to fix the tickets, and with engineering reviewing the output. So most of our product roadmap is actually not informed by Twitter. It's mostly informed by having very, very close relationships with people who are actually using a product with real pains. But Twitter is an enormously effective top of funnel marketing engine for us, and that's largely how I see it.
And as we look to the future, everything that you've described, from real-time automation to connected systems to clearer, more accessible financial intelligence, points to a CFO role that's evolving rapidly. So to close us out, how do you see that role transforming over the next 5 to 10 years? That's the first question, if we can even see out that far. And the second is, what skill sets are required for the future CFO?
If you look at the next 5 to 10 years, I think you can look back at the last 10 to 20 years and draw a pretty straight line to those things. So what's happened in the past 10 to 20 years is that the role of CFO has become more strategic and more technical. Those are probably the two things that sum up everything that's happening with those two qualities. So if you go back far enough, the role of the CFO was far more about backwards looking reporting, accuracy, control. And that makes sense when the technology wasn't there, when data wasn't as important or as common of virtue, a quality in most enterprises. But that's obviously changed now over the past 10 or 20 years. The role of CFO is far more about strategy, working cross-functionally across the company, understanding what opportunities are. So that's one. And I think slightly larger teams, but also better products, better technology, better support for data has enabled that. And the data bit, especially in the world of AI, has definitely increased the need for technical skills on the part of a CFO and indirectly their team. So one of the things that we see increasingly is the data function itself inside enterprise is increasingly under the purview of a CFO. There's now an understanding that a finance department owns a very important source of data, which is financial data. But hold on a second, there's all kinds of data that are secondary to finance, but and eventually will feed into the finance model somewhere. Who owns those things? So those two things have continued and will continue. And so where I see it going is the role of CFO is going to become even more strategic. It's going to be closer to a chief business officer or a chief strategy officer, chief operating officer than ever before. And it's going to become more technical. So understanding at a fine-grained level how the business works, creating an accurate simulation of the business, being facile with data and how you bring your data in and connecting it. And also there's an element even like product too. How do you create products and experiences for the rest of the company that brings clarity to everyone on how the business works and where it's going, so that everyone has the same compass and the same map and are marching the same beat of the drum? Those are the things that will continue to happen. And I think this is why there is a tremendous pull for the types of products in the space that we build.
Siqi, thank you so much for joining us again today. I've really appreciated having you back on the show.
Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure, Megan.
Yeah, I wish you and Runway continued success. And to all of our listeners, please tune in next week. And until then, take care.
You've been listening to CFO Weekly, presented by Personiv. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to hear all of our episodes. Want to learn more? Check out personiv.com. Thanks for listening.